let the occasion go by. As well, before I call the meeting to order, there's some housekeeping that's been taped to the counter here that I have to now read in public meetings. So before calling the meeting to order, we have a few housekeeping items to cover. In the event of an emergency, there are 2 exits from council chambers, one through the doors at the back of this room, one to my right. Our muster point is out front in the plaza. The room is also equipped with 2 panic buttons, which we've tested and they sort of work. Washrooms are out the back door at the end of the hallway. This meeting is being live streamed and recorded for public viewing. Anyone making a presentation or approaching the council dais or administration table will appear on camera. And lastly, I ask that everybody turns their cell phone on to silent mode. There. And with that, I will call the meeting to order and look to see if there's any changes, additions to the agenda. In which case I will move the agenda be approved as presented. And those in favor, that's approved unanimously. Just turning on all the mics because I think that's how we're doing it. Nope, not doing it that way. Okay. We had a dry run on this, worked pretty well. But great, agenda's been approved. Looking then to the minutes of Tuesday, July the 6th, are there any errors or omissions? Seeing none, I'll move the minutes be adopted as presented. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. And we'll move on now to the first item of business, G1, Bylaw 2019-06, Subdivision and Development Appeal Board. And we have Ms. Miller ready to prepare to present.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. So good to be with you once again. There's no presentation for today's item. It's a fairly straightforward housekeeping matter. It's in follow-up to an item that was discussed at the July 6th meeting with regard to policy PD-009 Subdivision and Development Appeal Board refund policy, which was rescinded. As was noted, when this policy was recommended for recession, the matters that policy covered needed to be updated, and they also needed to be more appropriately housed under one particular regulatory document, so the Subdivision and Development Appeal Board bylaw. So this amendment before you today, it addresses 2 things. It addresses how refunds will be dealt with moving forward when it comes to appeals that come forward, as well as ensures that all procedural matters associated with the Subdivision and Development Appeal Board are housed under one document. Unless there are any other questions, that is it for my presentation.
Thanks very much. Just question in the bylaw itself. Under withdrawing an appeal 43.1, it's in attachment 1 in the package. So a request, I'm just trying to understand this process. Requests made by the appellant to withdraw an appeal must be made in writing and submitted to the STAB clerk if the request is made, It seems to me that if the request is made is out of order, or I mean, not out of order, it's complicating the understanding for me. So a request made by the appellant to withdraw an appeal must be made in writing. And I would think then it would just stop there and go on to say before the hearing begins or after the close of hearing. So can you just walk me through the interpretation of that section?
Through you, Mayor Borman, I think what you're proposing as a potential amendment could address it. It's not consequential either way. The meaning of the bylaw will remain the same, whether we keep that last sentence if the request is made or we take it out. I think that's what you're asking.
Yeah, I guess I was just wondering why it's in there. I mean, what's the intent of? Seems like it confuses or complicates the direction.
Well, part of the reason it may have been worded that way is because it's dealing with two separate scenarios. One is before the hearing and one is after. But again, if you'd like to make an amendment to it
Okay,
to simplify that, it would not consequentially
great.
be detrimental to the bylaw.
Okay, thank you for humoring me. There are other questions or points to consider with Ms. Miller? Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Mayor Borman. I do have a question regarding 43.6, refunding an appeal fee. The refund of the appeal fee shall only be granted if the appeal is withdrawn prior to the scheduling of the hearing. Our regular practice is to have the appellant appeal to the SDAB to ask for a refund. So, and the SDAB had the authority to refund or not. Is that going to be replaced by this refund policy then?
That is correct.
Okay, so the appeal board no longer has to rule on whether there will be a refund.
No, those are administrative matters for the town anyways. So really not within the jurisdiction of the appeal board per se.
Okay, that's the way we've always done it though. That's not part of the legislation though. That was just our process.
That was just your process.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Are there any other questions at this time for Ms. Miller? Councillor Comfort, do you have any questions? No. Great, thanks very much for being here to present. That I will move the council give first reading to Subdivision and Development Appeal Board Bylaw Amendment 2021-16 Appeal Withdrawals. And I will move to amend the bylaw by removing the words "if the request is made" from section 43.1. So discussion on that amending motion. I think it's straightforward. We spoke to it during the presentation. Any discussion on the amending motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question on the amendment then. Those in favor? Unopposed, motion's carried unanimously. Back then to first reading of the bylaw. Discussion on the first reading as amended. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed, motion's carried unanimously. It's taking me a little while to get into the rhythm here. I'll move then that council gives second reading to Subdivision and Development Appeal Board Bylaw Amendment 2021-16. Discussion on that motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed, motion's carried unanimously. I'll move the council go to third reading of the bylaw. Those in favor? Opposed, motion's carried unanimously. And I'll move then the council give third reading to the Subdivision and Development Appeal Board Bylaw Amendment 2021-16 Appeal Withdrawals. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed, motion's carried unanimously. Phew. Okay, moving on. Item G2, Designated Officers Bylaw Amendment 2019-21. Ms. Hyatt, are you speaking to this?
Thank you, Your Worship. I wasn't actually intending to speak.
Okay.
I think the RFT speaks for
Pretty
itself.
straightforward. Are there any questions from members of council to administration on this item? Seeing none, I'll then move that council give first reading to the Designated Officers Bylaw Amendment 2021-18. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. I'll move then that council gives second reading to Designated Officers Bylaw Amendment 2021-18. Discussion on that motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed, motion's carried unanimously. I'll move then that council go to third reading of the bylaw. Those in favor? Opposed, motion's carried unanimously. And I'll move then that council give third reading to the designated officers bylaw amendment 2021-18. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed, motion's carried unanimously. And we'll move on then to item G3, Culture Advisory Committee bylaw. Ms. Barlomi.
Literacy, the Tessina and the Stony Nakota, as well as the Métis Region 3. I'm honored and privileged to live on this land. Mayor Barrowman, members of council, I'm here today to ask that you give first, second, and third reading to the Cultural Advisory Committee bylaw, and that you approve the public art policy and the reserves policy as presented. Maybe it's going to be this. Oh, here we go. Because the establishment of the Cultural Advisory Committee is contingent on the approval of the public art policy, I will present them together, beginning with the public art policy. This policy articulates the intention of the municipality to make art a permanent part of everyday life and a legacy for future generations, contributing to foster a sense of place and increase the livability and artistic richness of the community through funding, acquisition, care and maintenance, and the deaccession of public art. The updated policy outlines a sustainable funding model, ensures resources for the ongoing maintenance and repair of the public art collection, details the criteria for the collection and for site selection, aligns collection management processes with other town policy, and lays out the roles and responsibilities for council, administration, and the proposed Cultural Advisory Committee. Canmore's public art program supports excellence in public art by emerging and established artists in new and traditional media through commissions and projects. The town is committed to supporting acquisition and maintenance of a public art collection that develops Canmore as an increasingly vibrant place in which to live, work, and visit, adds to the identity and quality of the civic landscape, enriches people's experience of public spaces, contributes to community pride, and enhances Canmore's cultural assets. To align with the planning framework set out in the Cultural Master Plan, the guiding principles for the public art program will focus on leadership, inclusion, space, and investment. The Cultural Master Plan details the need to strengthen Canmore's cultural workforce and sector and support and promote traditional and diverse forms of cultural expression. It also made recommendations to increase the town's current investment to address the gaps in support of the cultural sector and develop a new funding model for public art. The public art policy lays out the funding structure to meet the investment goals and align with Canadian municipal best practices. To broaden the financial support and strengthen the sector, 2 changes are being recommended to the current funding model. The first recommended change is that we increase the per capita contribution to the Art Trust from $3 to $5 for permanent and non-permanent residents. 60% of the per capita funding will be used for the design and commission, acquisition, site preparation, installation, maintenance, and conservation of public art. 10% of the value of the public art collection must be in the Art Trust Fund at the beginning of each calendar year to fund maintenance, repair, and conservation. The current value of the public art collection is $358,000. So of that 60% funding, a minimum of $35,800 will need to be set aside for maintenance. 40% of the per capita funding will support an artist and arts organization grant program. Details on this program will be developed and brought back to council at a later date. This change, laid out in recommendation number 1, will change the annual contribution from 54,000 at 3% to 90,000 at 5%, an increase of $36,000. The second recommendation calls for an allocation of 0.5% of the average preceding 5-year period's annual approved budget's tax contribution to municipal infrastructure capital projects, excluding all utility projects. I'm going to say that again because it's a whole lot of words. The second recommendation calls for the allocation of 0.5%, so 0.5% of the average of the preceding 5-year period's annual approved budget's tax contribution to municipal infrastructure capital projects, excluding all utility projects. So above ground, not below ground. The allocation will be determined at the time of budget preparation. Grant funding of a capital project is not considered part of this contribution, and the allocation may be limited by overall available funds. 100% of the capital project funding will be used for design and commission, acquisition, site preparation, installation, maintenance, and conservation of public art. Funds derived from capital project allocations may be allocated to a specific project from which they are sourced, or may be combined with other funds to either enhance a more prominent capital project or to support a non-contributing project. Based on the last 5 years' financial contribution, the financial contribution would be about $13,000. These two recommendations, if approved, would result in a tax increase of 0.19% in 2022. With an approved budget, administration is authorized to acquire public art through commission, purchase, donation, loan, partnership with an external party, or lease. Any person involved in a decision to acquire public art must comply with the town's purchasing policy and code of conduct policy. Public art purchased by the town must be unencumbered and acquired through a full transfer of ownership from the artist to the town. The artist will retain any and all copyright and moral and intellectual rights to the artwork. Acquisitions must be accompanied by a maintenance plan and a de-accession plan. Public art is intended to complement current and future municipal development infrastructure and enhance public spaces. Site selection will include a public engagement process that puts signage in a potential location with an opportunity for the public to provide comments. When selecting a site for the placement of public art, accessibility, visibility, discovery, whether it's project specific, we'll consider the environment and municipal access. They will all be considered in the site. When acquiring public art for the town's collection, it is important that the artwork provides a sense of place, community pride, and identity through the creation of new works across all mediums in a variety of public spaces, reflects community and regional diversity, values, history, nature, and culture, is built in collaboration and partnership with Indigenous and multicultural communities, as well as the private sector, internal and external stakeholders, that it creates opportunities, challenges, and encouragement for all types of artists and artistic expression, and is comprised of relevant art that inspires people and an expression of the times. Might be one ahead here in my note. Administration Council and the Cultural Advisory Committee will all have roles and responsibilities associated with the public art program. Administration is responsible for preparing a 5-year public art capital plan, bringing policy updates to council, and making the final decision on acquisition and site selection. Council is responsible for approving the public art policy and any amendments to the policy as needed, approving expenditures from the Public Art Trust through the budget process, and approving annual contributions to the Public Art Trust based on the funding model detailed in this policy. The Cultural Advisory Committee will be responsible for advising administration on the acquisition of public art, monitoring administrative practices related to planning, acquisition, placement, maintenance, and de-accessioning to ensure a high standard is maintained, and making recommendations to administration for amendments to this policy. To ensure the Arts and Events Department remains responsive to community needs, the Cultural Master Plan recommends that Council disband the Canmore Public Art Committee and establish a Cultural Advisory Committee. The committee will take on the responsibility of CPAC, however, will have a broader portfolio. The purpose of the Cultural Advisory Committee is to provide advice and recommendations to help Council implement the Cultural Master Plan based on approved budgets, to foster partnerships, innovation, and commitment for developing a creative economy, creative places, creative people, and creative identity, and to provide advice and recommendations to help administration acquire public art and manage the public art collection. The committee reports annually to Council on the progress in realizing the directions and actions outlined in the Cultural Master Plan, and assists administration by reviewing and recommending update to the town's arts and culture policies and plans for Council approval, suggesting priorities and community actions to be incorporated into work plans and budgets related to the implementation of the Cultural Master Plan, and making recommendations on all public art sites and acquisitions that are funded through the Public Art Trust or donated or acquired through other means. The committee collaborates with the community by looking for opportunities to engage, involve, and include the community in the public art process and in the building capacity of the cultural sector. The Cultural Advisory Committee will be authorized to establish temporary public art selection subcommittees as required to evaluate submissions received in response to requests for proposals and commissioned artwork and recommend a successful candidate to administration. The committee will be comprised of 5 to 7 voting members who will be appointed by Council's annual organizational meeting, including 1 member of Council, 1 member who is from the Treaty 7 Nation or Region 3 Métis, up to 3 public members who ideally represent the business, education, and social sectors in Canmore, 1 professional cultural worker either employed as such or in a volunteer capacity, and 1 member of the under 35 cultural community. The committee includes the supervisor of arts and events or the designate is in a non-voting capacity. The number of years served by public members shall not exceed 8 years. To be eligible for public membership on this committee, a person must be a resident of Canmore and a member of Treaty 7 Nation or Region 3 Métis and be at least 18 years of age. So, to summarize, the public art policy has been rewritten to align with the Council-approved Cultural Master Plan and other town policies. The most significant changes to the policy are the funding model, sustainable maintenance reserve, final site selection is within the purview of administration's purview, the disbanding of the Canmore Public Art Committee, the establishment of the Cultural Advisory Committee. And here are administration's recommendations again. The Council give first, second, and third reading to Bylaw 2021-17, Cultural Advisory Committee Bylaw, and for the public art policy that Council approved, the public art policy AE 001 is presented, and that Council approved reserves policy FIN 007 as presented. Questions?
Thank you. I have 1 or 2 questions.
Really?
The question I have in regards to the Cultural Advisory Committee, the membership notes 1 member will be a Treaty 7 Nation or a member of Treaty 7 Nation or Region 3 Métis. And I'm wondering if there's an intent to have that position or representative. Will there be a role for the First Nations, for instance, the First Nations Council administration in selecting somebody to sit on our committee, or how will that play out?
I would suggest it would be by application, just like any other position on a committee. So we would get the word out, perhaps through council and through elders in the community, to see who might be interested and who they would encourage to apply.
I'm just aware that at times there's quite a process involved in working with First Nations who, in a formal way. So we're seeing this as being quite informal, not an official representation from Stony Nakota, for instance, just a member on the committee that happens to be a member of the nation.
That's correct. It's a public member from their community. Right? Just like we would appoint a public member from our community, the applications would come and we would select from that membership based on credentials.
Great, thank you. I have questions on the public art policy as well, but maybe if there's other questions in regards to Cultural Advisory Committee bylaw, we can go through that first. Councillor McCallum. Yes, let me
This
do
is so
that.
strange.
I agree.
Hi. Hi.
Nice to see you.
It's so nice to see you. So my question is actually about the contribution. So the $3 per capita contribution, it's been $3 for a long time. How long has it been $3 for?
Well, that's an excellent question. So we rewrote the cultural policy in 2010. It was the case then, and so it was prior to 2010. So it has been in effect for some time.
A long
Yeah.
time. Excellent.
So just sorry to interrupt. This is actually a question regarding public art policy rather than the
Oh, okay.
Cultural Advisory Committee, and it doesn't matter, we can blur them.
Okay.
But the first one is fairly straightforward and might as well deal with any questions having to do with the Cultural Advisory Committee first.
Okay.
If that's, are there any other questions in that regard? Councillor Comfort? Councillor Comfort?
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Great. You actually scooped me on the question about Treaty 7 Nation, what the process would be, or Region 3 Métis, how that would be, how that would play out, how that would be affected. And so my question is, would that person have to be a resident of Canmore, or could they be not, but still meet that other criteria?
Yeah, thank you for your question, Councillor Comfort. As a member of a Treaty 7 nation or a Métis Region 3, they are indeed people of the land that we're standing on, so they don't need to be a resident of Canmore because they are a resident or a person living on this land. That is Treaty 7 land. So,
Perfect, thank you.
Councillor Stanford, you had a question. Is it in regards to Cultural Advisory Committee? Go ahead.
Thank you for your presentation, Ms. Barlomi. Can you just describe what a professional cultural worker, who that encompasses?
absolutely. It could be a, sorry, it could be, I'm just trying, it's hard to make a face contact. Yeah, we're going to figure this out. It could be an appraiser, it could be a gallery owner, it could be a conservationist, it could be anybody that's working as a professional in the arts industry. It could even be a landscape architect, an architect, you know, so anyone that is in that area.
And it describes that person as being paid or unpaid.
So it's either they're either working in the industry, or perhaps they're retired and are not working at the time, or maybe they're a volunteer with an organization. Right now, we have a member of the Mountain Arts Foundation on CPAC who is not necessarily working in the industry, but is a volunteer. So, yeah.
Okay, that's great clarification. I was trying to imagine what that would look like. I also had another question for you. Maybe this is the policy, the other policy, but in the event that people have a private property that they want to adorn with public art, is there some recognition of that in the public art policy?
Public art by definition is art in the public realm. So usually on publicly owned property. If they are going to be, so the quick answer, I suppose, is no. However, if it is part of a community art project and a neighborhood decides that they want to paint all their fences so that the public can see them, or all their garage doors along an alley. Well, certainly that's part of community art rather than public art, because public art by definition is on public land or in a public place where the public is accessible. I'm sure that people don't want us poking around in their backyards to look at the fireplace they built for, as part of community art. But if it's part of a community art project, then by all means.
Okay, and I think there were some developments out on behind the coast there that said that they would host public art in their private space. Is that?
It's actually, if it's in a private space, it's private art. But if it's in the public view, it comes through our department by way of planning for approval. So it has been going to the Public Art Committee to make sure a fair process was in place, and that the art they're getting is one of a kind, and that kind of follows our policy as well. So it's private art, and if it's in the public realm, it comes through our Public Art Department.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
So we're sort of entertaining questions in regards to either of the reports at this point. Councillor McCallum, did you have another question?
I did. I had a question about copyright in public art.
Just turn on your mic there.
Thanks.
Okay.
And so, and it's usually I sometimes know the answer to the questions I ask, but this one I have no idea. Public art that the town of Canmore has commissioned or we've purchased or whatever, does it have copyright? And so I've noticed, for instance, the Big Head has been, I've bought keychains, I've bought magnets, I have sent them to my people.
Yes.
Well, I'm very proud of that piece of public art. And then afterthought going, oh, are we making any money off of this? Can we make any money off of this? Is this a public, like, I know that in my hometown, for instance, there's a local business that has had Christmas ornaments made of some of their public pieces in Hamilton.
Mhm.
So, it's just a question about public art, and this seemed to be the best opportunity for me to ask you this question.
No problem. So
Copyright.
yes, the artist does hold copyright to their work, and no, we shouldn't be mass producing it in any way or copying it in any way without the permission of the artist and without paying the artist something
Mhm.
for that. So we, as the town of Canmore, are not reproducing pieces of the Big Head to sell.
Right.
Or putting the Big Head on a t-shirt or any of those kinds of things. If we did want to do that, we'd have to get permission from Al Henderson, who is the artist that built Big Head.
Okay.
And yeah, so anybody else who's up to it is breaching copyright of the artist, but that's not for us to.
No, I guess I just wondered if it was something to look at in the future, if it's a possibility with our art collection to have little bits of public art in our living room or on our Christmas tree or whatever. But anyways, it was
Yeah,
just a,
with the permission of the
Of
artist,
course, yeah.
absolutely.
anyways, thank you for entertaining my question.
Councillor Comfort, do you have a question?
Thank you, Mayor Barman. My question is, and I think I do know the answer to this, but I will look for your answer. What was the rationale behind designating one member of the under 35 cultural community? And who might that be? Could that be like, that could be a graphic artist or a sculptor, or perhaps a spoken word person? So can you speak to that?
Absolutely. So to make sure that we're attracting the under 35 group, we do want to have a member on our committee. And the reason for that is that group of people feels, I suppose, ignored or underrepresented at the planning table. They don't know where to go or how to make plans. And so making it mandatory to have somebody from that age group on the committee will keep us more relevant, more, I suppose, hip, more, just more reaching out to that group that's going to, and we want them to stay in town. I mean, that's also a group that tends to leave. So if we're making this a welcoming place for them, a place where they hear their voice, where they're represented, where they can invite members of their community in to be part of the public art process, it'll only make our public art program richer and make us all a little bit wiser. So I guess that's the main reason.
Thank you, very eloquent.
Councillor Seeley.
Thank you, Mayor Borman. Thank you for the presentation, Ms. Bartolome. Just in transitioning to the Cultural Advisory Committee, engage and include the community. I think that's a very positive step. Can you just speak on that a little bit?
I'm sorry, on
Transitioning to the to engage and include community members. So you're
Absolutely.
transitioning a little bit.
Yeah, so we currently do have public members, community members on the Public Art Committee, and it's really important to do so because often you get a layman's opinion about how things should be moving forward rather than an elitist opinion through artists. So there's a real effort to make sure that we are getting community members from different sectors, so all sectors can be represented, and so that we're hearing opinions from different groups. Because if you're always talking to people of your own opinion, you're never going to grow as a committee or as a community. So it's our intention for the public art program to embrace community as a whole. And in order to do that, you have to invite community into the conversation.
I think that's great. Thank you.
Just to be clear, the Public Art Committee has always been made up of community members, so
It
not
has.
really a transition. It's just-
Well,
I think that, if I may, the transition, I believe, is that we've actually indicated that we'd like somebody from education, from business, and from the social sector.
Yeah.
So I think we're reaching out a little bit further.
Thank you. Councillor Hillstead.
Thank you, Mayor Borman. Thank you, Ms. Bartolome. With the committee being comprised of 5 to 7 voting members, what happens in the case that, because like we lay out a very specific group that we're looking for, what happens if we can't get someone from one of those, like specifically those 3, like the Treaty 7 Métis or the professional cultural worker or the under 35? Like, what happens if we don't get one of those? Is it just, do we put out another application, or as long as we get 5 people, we're
I think
good?
as long as we get 5 applicants, we're good. And as long as we're advertising for all of the people we're looking for and we have no applicants, we can't really do a lot about that, I suppose.
Thank you.
I have a few questions as well. In regards to the public art policy review. So it references the site selection process, including public engagement, the signage in a potential location, et cetera, et cetera. How long would we leave the signage there for the public to be aware of?
3 weeks.
3 weeks?
Mhm.
And was that actually in the policy? I don't think it was it?
No, I don't think it is.
Think we should amend the policy to include that?
Mhm.
Maybe the clerk could make a note of that. And otherwise I'll forget. Thanks. So why, trying to wrap my head around the 0.5% of capital project over and above the longstanding process of collecting through taxes to fund the reserve. So why would we have 2 separate collections rather than simply arguably say the collection through taxes will, rather than 5%, be more? I mean, it seemed to complicate the matter.
I think because well, I don't think it is because when we are building something that's maybe a fire hall, it would be great to be able to take advantage of the money coming from the fire hall. And that perhaps if the fire hall was a good place for public art, we would do project-specific art for that fire hall. And we could be included in the process from the beginning so that our costs are lower and we can take advantage of the trades they might have on site and that kind of thing. So it ebbs and flows with what we're developing. So if we're not building anything big, then we're not getting a bigger contribution. So it just speaks to what we're building at the time. But I mean, from $3 to $5, we're still getting that same $3 because the other $2 will be going to artist and art grants, artist and art organization grants. So that's another reason for separating it out.
I guess one of my concerns is that the funding that comes from a capital project will be specifically directed to that project site, which we've seen work out badly in Calgary and other places?
In the presentation, I pointed out that it would not have to be project specific. If we deemed that, let's say we were building a new wastewater treatment plant, clearly a lot of people aren't going by there to visit. So that wouldn't be the best place for public art. We would still want the money that would go to that art, but we would put it into another capital project and have a piece built someplace else, or keep it in the fund to do something at a later date. So we are not married to the site. However, we do consider the site where the money came from, or the project that the money came from, when we're developing our plan moving forward.
And the section in the policy itself is, as you say, it's non-directive. It may be allocated to the specific project, but so basically that assuages my concern.
Okay.
Just, don't want to get one of those
No,
blue rings.
that's, well, some people love the blue ring, so be very careful.
Wondering as well about the possibility, I was looking through the policy to see if there's any direction specific to this interest, and I don't see it, but in the past, the Public Art Committee has never acquired art for the public art collection directly from an artist. There's always been a competition. And it seems to me that it would be really great if the town could acquire specific pieces, particularly from local artists. But is that something that is addressed in the policy or could be?
It's actually addressed in our purchasing policy. We cannot do direct purchase from an artist. We have to have it out for competition. So it is part of our purchasing policy, depending on the price of the piece. But certainly when we're talking about public art, anything over a certain price, we have to put it out for competition.
Yeah, it limits us in some ways, which is unfortunate. Councillor Sanford, while I'm looking through my questions, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Barman. And just to clarify that reserve allocation from eligible capital projects, that would be an average of several years, right?
Correct.
So you wouldn't necessarily be collecting just exclusively for the fire hall, because that would be a very large capital project. But if you average that cost over, is it three years or 5 years?
Yeah,
Okay.
5 years.
So that would essentially smooth the 5-year average, just even though it's a very large project.
It would. However, it would also ensure that we get money in years where it's not looking good, right? Like when there's no capital projects, and perhaps the capital project allocation for above ground dwellings is zero. And so we're still having benefit from the fire hall in years where we're not actually building.
But when you're collecting on that average, the allocation isn't coming exclusively from the fire hall, but you would consider doing something at the fire hall?
Yes, for
Oh,
sure.
okay.
Yeah, if it was in the public realm and if it was yes, for sure.
Okay. And the wastewater treatment plant would be coming out of the utility budget anyway, so that wouldn't,
Well,
be
that was a
something-
bad example.
yeah,
Okay,
that-
but
it's not, so that wouldn't be under consideration. It would only be capital projects that are outside of the utility rate model.
Yeah.
Okay. Great.
Just looking at the section in the policy on de-accessioning of public art. And there's a list of conditions there that would lead to council deciding on the de-accessioning,
Mhm.
but it's a maybe. Council may make that decision in these specific circumstances. Outside of those very specific 5 circumstances, then what would be the process for de-accessioning?
If it was something that was contentious, I would certainly bring it to council for you to make that decision. If it was something that was a matter of public safety and needed to be removed quickly because it was, it was a hazard, then it wouldn't necessarily have to come to council. It would be in the community's best interest that it be deaccessioned. So it would depend. We have the criteria here that we would follow. I would suggest that in most cases, it would come to council, at least for information at a committee of the whole meeting, or for approval at a business meeting.
Great, thank you. So outside of those conditions, would it be a decision of the Cultural Advisory Committee or just administration?
I think it would be recommended through the Cultural Advisory Committee because they're a recommending body. They're not a decision-making body. So they could recommend to administration that happen because they've heard a number of concerns, but it would be administration's decision based on the criteria laid out in the policy.
Okay, thank you. Just wondering, connected to that is section 24, where it details what council is responsible for. There's 3 approvals that are referenced. I wondered if we should add D, approving the deaccessioning of any art in the public art collection under certain circumstances. Or was the effect?
I mean, if that's certainly up to you. I don't know that it's up to you.
Yeah, well, that section is specifically setting out what council is responsible for. And it doesn't say council is responsible for.
It could just mirror the same wording that council may be responsible for approving the deaccession of a public art piece. Because I think the intention that it is that it not read that council has to approve every deaccession, but that they may be called upon to approve the deaccessioning of an artwork in the collection.
Yeah, I guess to your point, it is addressed in section 20. Did you have something to say?
I don't need to say it. I think it's been said, but I'm wanting to agree with Ms. Bartolome. I don't think we want to tie it to policy that council must. I think the way it's written, there is some administrative decision-making that may be needed. We don't do a lot of deaccessioning. It's not a common practice. So part of why and when we would bring it to council is be contingent on the specific circumstance. I just don't know that it needs to be added at this time to the policy, but something we could look at as we have more experience needing to do deaccessions.
Great.
So I think it can stay as it is. Sorry, that was a long way of trying to say that one little short
Councillor
sentence.
Comfort has her hand up.
Yeah, I agree with you. Councillor Comfort.
I'm just curious if there's ever any means for the town of Canmore to sell pieces, public art pieces that might be in storage or not out in the public view in order to bulk up the reserve fund for purchasing public art. That be a possibility?
Part of the policy states that we're not to sell pieces of public art to just to buy other things. However, there is a deaccession plan that would be given by an artist. If we're choosing to deaccession something, what right does that artist have? Does he have a right to buy it back? Do they have a right to the materials within that piece? Like, what are their rights? So I think that would also be on a one-off basis. Does that help?
Yeah, it does somewhat, but I'm curious about, oh no, that'll do. I guess it's a one-off situation, so you deal with it as it comes up, right?
So, and we too probably have pieces that are like Downer Romans pieces here that are maybe in storage, and maybe moving forward, there'd be an opportunity to look at circulating them through so that we could see them. But selling pieces, we're not in the business of selling artwork. We're in the business of showing, preserving, conserving artwork. So.
Okay, thanks.
The one other question I have is in regards to funding under section 5B. It notes that 40% of the per capita funding will go to the Artist and Arts Organization Grant Program. I think you addressed that in your verbal presentation, but That doesn't exist yet, does it?
No, it doesn't exist yet. So 40%, not of the capital, it's of the the
Per capita.
$5 contribution
Right.
would be. So of that $90,000, 40% of that would go to arts and arts organization granting. And we will be writing the criteria and the granting criteria, I suppose, and bringing it back to council for approval.
Do you have any idea when that might happen?
Well, after this policy is approved, no, it won't be till the new year.
Okay. So in the meantime, if the organization, artisan arts organization grant program isn't approved or whatever, then that 40% of the per capita would then just go to where it's always gone.
Yes.
Great. Looking to see if there's other questions. And I see none. Thanks for your presentation. Did somebody make a note of that small amendment that I was thinking about? Okay, so let's start with the motion on G3. Which is Culture Advisory Committee bylaw. So I'll move the council give first reading to bylaw 2021-17 Cultural Advisory Committee bylaw. Was that the one that I had a small amendment for? I think they'll put it on the overhead.
Thank you. Cheyenne's taking minutes remotely, so if she could provide that wording and share her screen, that would be great.
Okay, we'll see if the magic works. Might have been an amendment for the,
It's amendment for the policy, not for the bylaw.
okay, thanks very much. Great, so we'll get to that in a second. So at this point, first reading of bylaw 2021-17, Cultural Advisory Committee bylaw. It's on the table. And I'll speak in support of that. I think it's a really good transition. We've done very well over the years with Public Art Committee and acquiring, starting to build a really great body of public art. I see this as taking the town to the next level, if you will. And I also appreciate the thought that went into the makeup of the committee. Looks like a really good cross representation. So I'll be happy to support this this motion. And did you have something? For some reason your light just came up. Speaking to the motion. No other speaking to the motion. Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Mayor Barman. I too would agree that it's probably time, and it's very well thought out the way this recommendation is made. I like the fact that it's both resident and non-resident population that will be contributing to this. And I think the accruing this amount of money into, or sorry, I'm looking at the public art. I'm getting confused here. The makeup of the committee, yes, is a good idea. Hopefully, we do get those specific people that we need to represent all those different demographics. But I too will consider that great idea. Thank you.
Further discussion on the motion, Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Mayor Barman. I'd be happy to support this. I think this Cultural Advisory Committee was something that came out of the Cultural Master Plan. And it's an important sort of shift in how we look at art and culture within Canmore. And I think this is the first big step. We have, of course, some other amendments, some policies to amend, but this is the first big step in moving in that direction. I had the opportunity when Councillor Comfort was on leave to sit with the Public Art Committee, and you can see that they're really ready to make this move. And it there's a lot of contribution within regards to the policies, et cetera, from that group. So I'll be happy to support this. Thank you.
Councillor Hillstead,
I too will be happy to support this new bylaw for the Cultural Advisory Committee. I think it is a good transition. You know, they're going to cover a broader scope than just purely public art. It's going to be better for our community in that sense. So not much more needs to be said. So
Councillor Mara.
Well, I too will be happy to support this. And I do want to thank the committee or the work administration has put into this, that there is such a diverse group of people that would be on the committee. So that adds to what we're looking forward and doing, moving forward with this policy and this committee. So I support.
No further discussion. I'll call the question on first reading. Those in favor? And opposed, motion's carried unanimously. I'll then move the council give second reading bylaw 2021-17, the Cultural Advisory Committee bylaw. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed, motion's carried unanimously. I move the council go to third reading of the bylaw. Those in favor? Opposed, motion's carried unanimously. And I'll then move the council give third reading of the bylaw 2021-17, Cultural Advisory Committee bylaw. Discussion on that motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. And then I will move the council approve public art policy AE-001 as presented. And I think I'm moving an amendment to that motion, which will probably appear on the overhead.
Sorry, can we just clarify that motion? Are we adding, is it 23D that you're adding? Can you just have a look?
Well, I had hoped you'd made a note of that. That one.
Yeah, to the public art policy, add section D to section 23. Signage would be up for 3 weeks. 15.
Thanks.
Right. Yeah. Signage.
Did you grab that, Cheyenne?
No, I did not hear that. Can you repeat that?
Section 15.
Yeah, so we'll be adding G to section
Right.
15.
Okay, council gets the, understands the amending motion. So that amendment's on the table, the discussion to the amending motion. Councillor Sanford.
I think item 15 already goes up to F. So adding it to 23D makes sense, but are you wanting
it's
to
for
put that
15
under
it's
site
for-
selection criteria?
This is for signage and potential locations under
Yeah.
section 15.
So site selection criteria, we'd need to add that to the bottom of that. So G? Oh, you did see G, okay. All right, yeah, just to clarify that.
Thank you.
So that would go under the site selection criteria.
Right.
Got it.
Okay, to the amending motion then, for the discussion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor, oh, we'll need to see Councillor Comfort again. Those in favor of the amending motion, opposed, motion's carried unanimously. Back then to first reading of the public art policy approval as amended. Those in favor, opposed, motion's carried unanimously. This will get really difficult if it's a, complicated land planning issue we got going here. I'll move then that council gives second reading of public art policy A-001 as amended. A discussion on that motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Oh. Didn't pop up on the board.
Is that working?
Not
Okay.
exactly. No, but that's okay.
Oh,
Counselor
because I
Sanford.
was the previous one. Yeah, so we should have some discussion on this, right? And what I like about this one is that,
We're still on the first motion, the approved public art policy 01 is presented.
yeah. Do we want to discuss it?
That's just one motion, yeah, not three readings.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you have
discussion on-
another amendment you wanted to make?
No, I don't. So
Okay.
no, it's just the motion to approve public art policy as amended.
Okay,
So discussion on that.
yes. I wanted to just say that under the funding model, the fact that the allocation may be limited by overall available funds, that's a significant aspect of this funding model. And the per capita increase is also a significant part of this funding model, going from $3 to $5, right? But I think there are some good checks and balances in this to make sure that the public art policy is properly funded over time and that the community gets the benefit of that. So that's what I have to say.
Well, I'll certainly support the motion. I'm really pleased to see after how many years of the $3 per capita? 15? Yeah. So a long time, and we've done really great work with that $3 per capita. Some of us have spoken in years past about increasing that, and I think it's certainly past time. $5 per capita will make a big difference when it comes to acquiring public art. And it's not much of a hit for the taxpayers, in my opinion. So I'm pleased to see administration bring this recommendation forward and happy to support it. Other discussion on the motion, Councilor McCallum.
Thank you, Mayor Barman. I'm happy to support this. Was a question that came up when I was reading about what our annual contribution is. And I remember that $3 contribution back on my time on Community Services Advisory Committee, which was a long time ago. So I'm really happy to see that we've updated our funding model. I'm happy to see that the rolling contribution through past capital. I'm happy to see the checks and balances in terms of the exclusions on grant fundings, et cetera. And I think that this will be a very robust pot of money for us to do some really great things for the art sector in Canmore. So I'm happy to support this. Thank you, Ms. Bartolome, for bringing this forward. I know that you and your crew have worked very hard on this for many years.
Just add to that, it's a very positive news for the arts sector, but also for the community in general.
Yes.
Who benefit greatly from the public art collection. Councillor Seeley.
I'm also happy to support this. It's nice to see additional funding go to such an important place in town, and it follows Canadian municipal best practices. So happy to fall in line. It's important, so I do support it.
Further discussion on the motion, Councillor Comfort.
I may be repeating what's already been said, but I'd like to thank Ms. Bartolome and her staff for having worked on this, and the Public Art Committee as well. There's a lot of work that went into it, a lot of thought, and they have learned a lot from the process over the years, and we'll see great things from this. And I think as it shows that as a community, we value things cultural, and that's great. So good work, and thank you, and I'm happy to support this.
For the discussion, then I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. And then I'll move the council approved reserves policy FIN 007 as presented. Discussion on that motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? And opposed? Motion's carried unanimously.
If I may, I'd like to take a moment just to thank the Public Art Committee past and present
you want to use the mics? So those at home can hear?
I'd like to thank the Public Art Committees, past and present, for all the work that they've done to bring the public art program to where it is today. When we first started, we were definitely in our infancy, and we were luckily taken under the wing of other municipalities that helped us along the way. And the Public Art Committee has been so instrumental in pulling this along and pulling me along and the town along to the place we are right now. So I've been fortunate to learn from a lot of people along the way and to work with them as what felt like coworkers a lot of times. And I'm really grateful to every one of them. So I want to be sure we thank them for their service. So thank you.
Thank you for thinking to bring that to the discussion. It is important. Public art policy or Public Art Committee has done a lot of really great work since first being created. So I'm glad you brought that forward. With that, we'll move on then to item H2, which is SB 2019-010 Silvertip Block 3 endorsement extension with Wojtenko. Let them all clear out. They're not that interested. It's been a while since we've seen you.
It has been.
Yeah.
Good
Nice to see
afternoon.
you.
It was interesting being part of the first council meeting via Zoom after the COVID pandemic started. And now I'm back in council chambers in person, a little gun shy. I don't know what this is anymore, seeing people in person. And so I'm here today for 3 separate subdivision applications. The first application in front of us is SB 2019-010. And this is to deal with subdivision of Silvertip, part of Block 3. And we're going to be requesting on behalf of the applicant an extension to the endorsement period. And there are 2 motions here. One is for the extension of the endorsement, and the second is for a reduction in application fees. So some background information. We, the subdivision authority, and it was the primary subdivision authority, approved this application on October 13th of 2020. Under the MGA, you have 1 year, or the applicant has 1 year to endorse the application. Given the past year, which has been tumultuous, busy for everybody, and just with how complex this subdivision is, the applicant is requesting for a 1-year extension to the endorsement period. Currently, we are working with the applicant on the final detailed engineering drawings, so we are getting close. Once those drawings are approved and we've worked through securities and they start some construction, we can then look at endorsement probably within the next year. The applicant is wanting to start construction as soon as possible. And so in the application package, one of the attachments is the approved tentative plan of subdivision, as well as the conditions of approval for council's review. So if you agree to this 1-year extension, they would be able to endorse the subdivision in 2022 instead of 2021. And then secondly, the fee reduction. The current fee schedule requests a 25% of the original fee for the extension. However, this would result in quite a large sum of money for the 2 applications. The amount of work for the subdivision extension isn't significant. It's staff preparing this presentation, the staff report, and coming to council. And so we did look at what are cost recovery fees for this, and we came up with $3,000. And so we are requesting for a fee reduction to $3,000 for the applicant. Concludes my presentation.
Great, thanks. So I'm curious if it's possible in the future for the applicant then to request a second 1-year extension. Is that?
Yes, the MGA was recently amended in one of the red tape reductions. And so it's now clarified that you can ask for 1 or more extensions of council. It could be longer than 1 year, but at this point in time, we only anticipate 1 year being needed. The reason for this as well, of going for a shorter time period, is if, for example, our standards change for roads and we go to a very different We suddenly want every road to be an arterial. It gives up council the opportunity to not agree to this extension and request for a different subdivision application.
So if the extension wasn't granted, then what would be the result?
In this case, likely they would have to come in for a brand new subdivision application. At this point in time, administration would foresee the same application coming forward with the same conditions of
Yeah.
approval.
And you noted that it's been a difficult year to move the work forward. I appreciate that. In the report, it notes that I'm a little confused about the endorsement. Given that the request is to proceed with construction of the infrastructure and have substantial construction complete prior to endorsement. So if the project can be substantially complete, what's the point of the endorsement?
So there's a couple stages in subdivision. The first one is getting your engineering drawings approved, and then we sign a development agreement. So that allows them to start constructing the municipal improvements. Endorsement is when the municipality says, you can take this plan of subdivision to land titles and create the lots, create the roads. So there's endorsement where the municipality has, yep, we have approved your engineering drawings. We agree with the lot sizes. We're happy with the way this plan looks. Once we stamp it with the endorsement, they can then take that to land titles, have those lots registered and sell titled lots.
Right. But in the meantime, the road's built and all of that work is done.
Yes, and that can be done prior to endorsement or after endorsement.
Yeah, I recall having this discussion when you first brought the endorsement forward. It still seems puzzling to me that the work can be done and endorsement comes later, but that's how it is. Are there other questions from Ms. Wojtenko, Councillor Hillstead?
Thank you for your presentation. So with regard to the fee schedule, will that need to come back to council at some point to amend it, since clearly the fees are a little high at the moment, or can potentially be a little high?
Through you, Mayor Borrowman, the planning department does plan to do a comprehensive review of the fee schedule going into 2022. So the next council can anticipate some adjustments to the fees associated with this type of application and a broader review in the months to come.
And then with that, is there to, I guess, dissuade people from continually coming back and just asking for extension after extension, can you do an escalating fee schedule where it escalates each time so that, hopefully deters people from just pushing things off?
Yes, that is our intention, to look at an escalating fee schedule in order to deter people from asking for extension after extension. However, we do have to acknowledge that they do have a right to that extension under the MGA. So we have to balance the desire to maybe be punitive with being fair and realistic.
Thank you.
Great, thanks very much. Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Mayor Barman. Just a question to Ms. Wojtenko. It's not really to the applicant's advantage to delay this process, is it? Because, if they have to go and have this approved by land titles to sell the lots, I'm sure they'd like to do that sooner rather than later.
Yes, the applicant has been working very hard with us as fast as we can through challenging times with COVID. To have the detailed engineering drawings approved so they can start construction. Yes.
So they're motivated to do that.
We've both been motivated. It's been challenging.
Yeah, I understand. Okay, thank you.
Other questions from members of council? Seeing none, thanks very much for your presentation. At this time, I'll move the council grant a one-year extension for the endorsement of SB 2019-010 to October the 13th, 2022. I'll support the motion. Given the advice of administration that primary cause of this need for an extension is the difficult year that we've all been through, and I can appreciate how that would have slowed down the work that the developer is doing. And I think to Councillor Sanford's point, I'm certain that the developer would like to get these subdivisions to the point where they can be selling the lot. So this seems like just a fairly straightforward request. I'm certainly happy to support it. Councillor Seeley.
Thank you, Mayor Borman. I'll also support this extension due to the complexity of the subdivision and the COVID impacts. Makes sense.
Is there any other discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. And I'll then move the council reduce the fee for this subdivision extension application to $3,000. And I'll support that motion as well, given the rationale that was provided by administration. It also seems like a reasonable motion for council to support. Is there other discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Moving on to item H3, SB 2019-009, Silvertip Block 10 endorsement extension. Ms. Wojtenko, did you want to
Me again.
give the same report again?
It's a very similar report. This is a different subdivision. It is part of block 10. It's the residential subdivision, not the commercial subdivision. It is even more complex than the commercial subdivision. There's more lots. The grades are more challenging. The developer's also been working very hard on the detailed engineering drawings. We're slightly behind on the residential, which is actually good for council because there is the direction in the area structure plan to bring forward the commercial subdivision first. So we have been working harder on the commercial and the residential is proceeding slower. So we are also looking for an extension to the endorsement period and the fee reduction on this application.
Thank you. I have no questions. Are there questions from other members of council? Councillor Sanford.
So just to clarify, essentially there's no change to the plan. They're bringing forward the same plan. They're just extending it. So it doesn't require a lot of work from administration to advance this one more year.
That's correct. There's no additional work from the extension.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Other discussion on the motion? So now I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. And I'll then move the council reduce the fee for this subdivision extension application to $3,000. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor and opposed, motion's carried unanimously. I think we have time to move on to the next item, which appears to be very similar. Ms. Wojtenko, item H4 PL 2020-0210 Railway Court endorsement extension.
Yes, thank you. It has been a busy year with subdivisions. In my time here at the town, this is quite unprecedented to have so many going at once. So this one is slightly different. This one is some existing lots and quite an extensive process as well. So council entered into an offer to purchase with the owner of these lands. And the conditions of the offer to purchase was one, they had to make a road closure bylaw application, which has been approved. And secondly, they needed a subdivision application approved and to construct municipal infrastructure, register the lots, close the road, and purchase the land from council. So we have been as well working through these conditions of the offer to purchase and of the subdivision. Again, due to COVID impacts and the complexity of the subdivision, we are still working on the detailed engineering drawings. We are also getting close on this subdivision. But again, we're looking for an extension. In this case with Railway Court, the infrastructure is in Valley Bottom. And as we know, if you're installing water and sanitary mains in Valley Bottom, It can be very challenging. There's one time of year you can really do that. We don't anticipate construction maybe this year, but maybe not until next spring. So this extra year will provide that grace period to the developer to construct in the best season possible. And with this one, we are not asking for the fee reduction. It is just for the time extension.
Thank you. Are there any questions from members of council? Seeing none, thanks very much.
Thank you.
That I will move the council grant a one-year extension for the endorsement of PL 2020-0210 to November 4th, 2022. I'll speak in support of the motion. Same situation as the previous two motions. It's been noted that it's been a very difficult year to move forward with these projects. So I have no issue with granting an extension at this time. Further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Thanks very much, Ms. Wojtenko. And we're moving along nicely here. Might as well move on to item H5, which is my report. So I'll speak very briefly to it. It's simple request, the Quarry Lake Park commemorative plaque for Stan Milner. And I think all of council is familiar with the relationship between the town and the Rocky Mountain Heritage Foundation. The foundation was created approximately 20 years ago, largely through the work of Mr. Milner, who worked with town council administration of the day and private sector to create a foundation that would serve to protect the Quarry Lake lands from any future development that would hinder the public enjoyment of those lands. We all know, well, many of us know that the lake was created sometime before that by Jerry Stevenson and Canmore Mines, a number of other people that worked with the mines, and quickly became a really critical, a key part of our municipal facilities. It was the swimming hole where people loved to go and have fun in the summer and also in the winter, honestly. So in that era, there was a number of development proposals for a number of parcels of land in and around Canmore. This was, if I recall, prior to those lands being annexed from the MD of Bighorn, but they were provincial lands. And in fact, on the Quarry Lake lands, there was as I understand it, there was a provincial lease tentatively signed on those lands with local businessmen, not the owners of the current Canmore Mines property. In fact, Councillor Mayor's father-in-law and some others in Canmore had an idea in mind for a project around the Quarry Lake Park or Quarry Lake. There was quite a bit of consternation in the community about that possibility, and Mr. Milner stepped up to work with the town to protect those lands into the future. And the foundation that was created is set up in such a way that the town and the foundation have equal voting rights. So it's 50-50 on the vote. So nothing really can happen on those lands without both the town and the foundation agreeing. And that was a precautionary, intentional decision so that future councils couldn't sell the lands into development. So Mr. Milner passed away this year, and the board of the Rocky Mountain Heritage Foundation are very interested in having a commemorative plaque installed at the Quarry Lake to recognize his really important contribution to the protection of the lands. And I'm not sure if you have that ready to go. I have a photo of the, can you skip to the other one first? Yeah, it's a smoky day, but this was, some of you will recognize this plaque, which was installed by the province many years ago, just as users get to the lake itself. And this is more or less what the foundation has in mind, is a small bronze plaque mounted on a stone, not necessarily in this location, but something like that. And then if you just go back to the draft inscription, thanks. So the board has drafted this and had the family vet it. So it's fairly simple and straightforward. And because of the requirement for the town and the foundation to both approve anything like this, the foundation is asking council to support their request to mount a commemorative plaque for Mr. Milner at Quarry Lake. So I'll entertain any questions if there are any. And maybe we need to, could you take that down so we can see Councillor Comfort again? If there's no questions for me during this report phase, I'll put the motion on the table that council approve a request from the Rocky Mountain Heritage Foundation to place a plaque at Quarry Lake Park commemorating Stan Milner's important contribution to the creation and longtime support of the park. The discussion on the motion. I'll certainly speak in support. Well, I sit on the board of the foundation as the mayor. The mayor is appointed automatically to the foundation board. So I've been involved in these discussions with the board for some time. And I really believe it's important that the community, not only today, but in future years, understand and what might have happened there and recognize the important contributions of people like Mr. Milner to protecting those lands for the community's future enjoyment. Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Mayor Barman. And I actually wanted to thank you for attaching the attachment, because it was more informational than I had been able to find myself over the years on the internet. So that I'm really grateful for that. It's a very rich history in a short period of time. I'd be happy and pleased to support this request. I actually find it quite a very humble request of the foundation based on the contributions that Mr. Milner has made through the foundation to Quarry Lake Park. Again, I feel it quite a modest request. I'm surprised I didn't actually ask to rename the park itself. But again, happy to support this and happy to share the history that you've provided with the public. Certainly provides us with a more nuanced understanding of what could have been up there and what isn't. And certainly it's a very loved location here in town by locals and visitors. So thank you for bringing this forward.
Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Mayor Barman. I too would be happy to support this request. I think it's really interesting. I don't believe I ever met Mr. Milner. And I know that my family has spent a lot of time up at Quarry Lake. So I've had a little bit of knowledge about the fact that that land was intended for development and that somebody stepped in and made a big contribution to the Bow Valley with their financial contribution, but also, you know, it's nice that we can recognize that because we've all had such a great benefit from it over the last, since 1999. It's important, I think, that we do recognize that contribution and celebrate it, because if I didn't even know about it when he was still alive, you know, people are going to forget that into the future. So I think it would be really good to commemorate him in perpetuity in that location. And this is a very tasteful way to do that. So I would certainly appreciate that
Thank you.
and approve.
Thanks very much, Councillor. Councillor Comfort, you had your hand up.
I did. I also am really pleased with the appropriateness of this tribute to Mr. Milner. And thank you for the time that you served and other members of the community, numerous members of the community worked hard to keep Quarry Lake from being developed and being able to maintain it as a community asset. So I'd also like to thank those folks as well. And lastly, I'm really not in favor of naming schools, buildings, whatever, with the exception of the Francis Cook III Regional Landfill. I'm not in favor of naming facilities after people, but rather, but to acknowledge it in this way, someone's contribution is wonderful. So thank you very much for steering this along, and thank you for your service on the Rocky Mountain Foundation, Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation? Oh,
Heritage Foundation.
Heritage Foundation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Seeley.
Yeah, this is easy to support. Mr. Milner's contributions were extraordinary and appreciated. And Quarry Lake is cherished by all. So it's nice to have it protected for our community. It's an important asset. So easy to say yes.
Right you are. And Councillor Hillstead.
I'm also happy to support this. I think it's quite fitting. And also I do appreciate the history lesson that you attached to this, because it was interesting to just have that information, because as Councillor McCallum pointed out, it is hard to find that information. So thank you for that.
Yeah, full disclosure there, I've struggled to understand the full history, and what I provided as an attachment was something that is part of the records from the foundation that I had access to, but I have no doubt that there's aspects of the history and the creation that are still missing. But thanks for supporting the motion. Councillor Mara.
I too am happy to support this motion and to have a commemorative stone for this Mr. Stan Milner. And yes, there is quite a bit of history and there's a lot of different little stories. I also have a connection where my stepdad is actually the Skinner who helped create the hole where the quarry is now. And in the process of, as you said, my father-in-law is one of the businessmen who was involved in looking at building a golf course, discovered that there was I believe it was called a three-toed salamander.
Yeah.
So that's also part of the history where they, realize that there's something else going on there besides that. And that's when I understand Stan Milner stepped in. So
that's right.
So I'm appreciative of this, and obviously for him having the vision. So I'm happy to support.
Great, thank you. And just since you brought that up, the infamous three-toed salamander, it was learned that they lived at the one end of the dog pond, just that one end of the dog pond. And if I recall, it's the only place in the world these salamanders exist. So that's why, if anybody at home is wondering, that's why that part of the dog pond is still out of bounds. Is we have three-toed salamander living there. At least there used to be. Okay, if there's no further discussion on the motion, we'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously, and thank you very much for that. I'll pass this news along to the foundation board, and the foundation will get started on creating the plaque. At this time, I think the next item might go on for a little while. So I think this would be a good time to call a short break if everybody is ready for that.
Yeah.
So we'll call a 10-minute break roughly. So back, 10 minutes. Thank you.
Josh, is that you?
Okay, I'll call the meeting back to order and thank the new guests for coming by and letting us see the baby one more time in real life rather than on Zoom. So with that, I will we'll go to item H6, Open Space and Trails Plan Update. Mr. Welsh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Council. Today, I'm going to exclusively talk with you about off-leash dog parks. Administration has reviewed previous feedback received on the Open Space Trails Plan, Open Space and Trails Plan, and on dog parks created since the approval of the policy in 2015. Oh, sorry.
We're working out some bugs on a new system here, the hybrid between in-person and Zoom.
So this is presenter view. Oh, this one. Nope. Can I have some assistance?
I think we can make this work.
Thank you.
That's why I get the big bucks.
This,
This is gray setting.
Yeah, it's great.
Swap. Oh, it's grayed out.
yeah, we'll find the general manager can't do it. CAO will have to
Well,
step
now
up.
we're all.
Oh, yeah, we got communications in on it. Hold on, don't make me come over there.
That won't be.
There we go.
See if this,
Thank you, communications.
see if you can see my notes again. Yeah, I need my notes, but I could just go through without them. It's okay.
We're good. We can, however
It'll
it
be
works for
quicker.
you.
All right, so I'm going to talk to you about dog parks. Last time you heard about dog parks was in 2017. There was a review of the open space and trails plan, and there was an effort to cite 3 new dog parks. But I want to go through first the agenda. Basically, I'm going to speak to the recommendation, talk about some of the work that's happened since the open space and trails plan, talk a bit about the open space and trails plan and the assessment that happened in 2017. I'll be showing a few precedents around dog parks and talk to you about the installations that took place since 2015 and some of the alternative approaches to what we're recommending. So what administration is recommending basically addresses just 2 of the guidelines in the OSTP found on page 33. The first recommendation is to reduce the minimum distance from residential or commercial property from 120 meters to just 20 meters. And the second recommendation is to delete the guideline stating that there's a minimum of 5 hectares in area for dog parks and replace it with actually a classification of 3 different sizes. Dog runs being up to 0.4 hectares in size, neighborhood parks between 0.4 and 1 hectare, and then destination parks being over 1 hectare in size. And so the open space and trails plan was approved by council in 2015 on June 2nd for planning purposes, as you're aware. Since then, there was an installation of 2 off-leash dog parks, one at Hubman and one at Palliser. Those were approved at the October 3rd, 2017 meeting. And then at that time, administration was asked to go back and take a look at some of the problematic guidelines to address the siting of future off-leash dog parks. And so why do we have off-leash dog parks? Well, this is a primary quote from the OSTP. The provision of off-leash dog park areas is important for avoiding wildlife conflicts and the stress that can result from dogs being exercised off-leash in inappropriate areas. So it's essential that we continue with this practice because of our commitments to human-wildlife coexistence. And so the current OSTP has 9 guidelines around dog parks. 4 and 5 are the 2 that we want to amend. to address some of the problems that were raised in 2017. And I've mentioned to you what those are already, the sighting distance as well as the size limitations. The other 7 haven't proven to cause any issues. And so in 2017, an assessment was performed to identify a location of up to 3 parks. It was determined that there really were no feasible alternative sites to locate dog parks based on these 2 criteria. And so that's why we're addressing them. And so administration recommended moving forward with Hubman, Palliser, and Spring Creek, those sites. We've only gone forward with the first 2. But also was noted that it could be many years before new development would enable locating of new dog parks. And therefore, we are looking at these 2 criteria in the guidelines to ensure that we can keep up with the pace of the need. Because as we know, we're land constrained and there may not be that many more opportunities for larger greenfield developments in town. So looking at precedents, most Canadian municipalities offer guidelines and/or regulations for dog parks, but they don't necessarily provide separation distances. Instead, they aim for global accessibility. So in Calgary, neighborhood dog parks, for example, they're intended to serve 800-meter walking distance. So here's an example. This is Nose Hill Off-Leash Dog Park. And in Vancouver, another precedent we looked at, they aim to ensure destination dog parks are accessible to the majority of residents within a 35-minute walk, which is about 3 kilometers, or short drive. And the neighborhood dog parks, which would be smaller, and dog runs, they're to be accessible to the majority of residents within a 15-minute walk, or a 1 kilometer radius. And so this is about access. And the challenge with the Vancouver approach is you need to keep pretty current census data to understand if you're hitting those marks, which we currently do not. This is a Renfrew. This is a popular park in Vancouver. This is, I think, the Renfrew Park. So currently we have 2 off-leash dog area classifications. First is a destination dog park. Second is a neighborhood dog park. Destination dog parks are Quarry Lake, Cougar Creek, and Elk Run. And our neighborhood dog parks are Palliser and Hubman. So we have 5. It's interesting to note that our last census data that we pulled noted that there were more dogs than kids in Canmore. I'm not sure where we are today, but it is true that dog parks are one of the most widely used public parks that we have. And so there were a number of criteria during the 2017 assessment that were raised by the public as common themes of concern or opposition. However, in going through any data associated with complaints about the parks that have been installed since 2015, none of these have been brought up. And so it therefore is our assessment that those 3 parks are functioning amenities and they're acceptable amenities for the town. So I'm just to show you briefly where these are located in case you're not aware. Elk Run is right next to the ball field between both industry and residents. It's about 1 hectare in size. Palliser's out in front of the development right near Highway 1. That's about 0.4 hectares. And then Hubman up in Three Sisters is situated around or within various developments next to the disc golf course. And that's also about 0.4 hectares. So this table takes a quick look at the relative size to one another, the 3 that have been built since the OSTP was approved, as well as their distance to the nearest residential property line and the nearest residential structures. And so as you can see, it's far closer than 120 meters. And so we're building our new criteria off of what we now can accept as precedent for the town. And so the first alternative to what's being proposed is essentially maintaining status quo. And that would be to maintain the recommended separation distance in the current OSCP of 120 meters. However, it should be noted that new dog park would then only be able to be accommodated from new greenfield development, larger development. Also, to maintain the status quo, we would maintain the minimum 0.5 hectare recommendation size on page 33, and not introduce a third classification of off-leash areas or dog parks. If we had that, 2 of our parks would be too small. So the other alternative is essentially to strike the 4th and 5th guidelines from page 33 of the OSTP, that being the separation distance and the minimum size constraint, and replace them with a new guideline that essentially provides access to off-leash areas based on a radius, as we see in Calgary and Vancouver and other municipalities. Challenge with this again is having to maintain census data. So our recommendation, to reiterate, is to change separation distance from 120 meters to 20, and to remove the minimum size area and introduce a new classification of dog park, which would be a dog run, to accommodate those smaller spaces. And that's it.
Thanks very
Questions?
much. Yeah. So was there rationale in the discussion? I'm sure there is rationale in the reduction from 120 meters to 20 meters.
The rationale essentially is taking a look at the 3 parks that have been built since the original approval of the plan as precedent for the town. They actually are closer. Each one of those parks, residences and or industry are closer than 20 meters. And so because there haven't been any complaints associated with what was assumed at the time to produce complaints, we arrived at the assumption that 20 meters would suffice because of the current situations that we have in town.
So I don't recall after the dog run, I guess, was opened up by Palliser by the Blackiston. I know prior to the establishment of it, there was concerns voiced by 1 or 2 residents in the building, but since that facility was opened, I haven't heard personally of any concerns from the residents of that property.
Yes, and the Parks Department doesn't not have any documented either. So
it seems to me a well-used facility. I often see people, it's a very small area, so often see small dogs on it. Maybe that's coincidental. The area, there was a proposal at the same time to develop something similar south of Creek and adjacent to Spring Creek Mountain Village. And I don't recall why we decided not to move forward with that one.
Public opposition would be my response to that. There
Yeah,
was significant
There was
opposition.
public opposition, but I thought there was some other rationale, but could be wrong.
Not to my recollection.
There certainly was some public opposition, which, I'm thinking when this, when people are looking at the report or understanding the rationale, the suggestion is that the fears and concerns expressed around the most recently developed dog parks have not materialized. I suspect they'll materialize when the next dog park is recommended immediately adjacent to something like Spring Creek Mountain Village. But there hasn't been any informal or formal survey of dog park users or neighbors or anything.
not since 2017. So we went back to the surveys that were administered for the original open space and trails plan, as well as what was done for 2017.
Right.
The assumption is that we would survey a community prior to building another, survey that particular community. The challenge for us in Canmore is that we actually can't meet the criteria that's in the open space and trails plan as it currently is written. So we're using our best examples within town to help guide us. So essentially that's where our criteria landed us.
So if this motion is supported, then what would be the next steps, or are there next steps envisioned by administration to develop a new off-leash dog area?
Not to my knowledge, in working with staff, colleagues, there haven't been any, there wasn't any discussion around what's next and when. It was just, this was a motion of council
Right.
that
So
we
this
needed
is
to address.
purely in response to that motion of council to
Yes,
open up the plan and revise it.
yes.
Thanks. Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Mayor
Hold on a
Barman.
sec now, I think.
Through you, Mayor Borman, just to clarify, if these recommendations are approved by council today, they would go into effect and be applicable to any new municipal reserve lots or other opportunities the town may have to build a dog park.
Sure. Thank you. And then, of course, there's a process involved to do that. Okay, thank you. Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Mayor Barman. Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Welsh. Could you tell us what the dog run, what the definition of that is, that's under 0.4 hectares in size?
Sure. Essentially, it's going to be quite similar to a neighborhood park, except in size. So our dog parks in town are rather bare bones in comparison to, say, a city. Basically, it's a fenced-in lawn. There's a double gate to ensure dogs don't get, run off or get loose. There's a place for trash. There's a place to take dog bags. Some parks have makeshift chairs that people have brought into them, but that's about it. And so our destination parks, which are a little larger and are sometimes used by visitors, may have a little bit more amenities. Quarry Lake may have a few more amenities coming up soon. But basically it's differences in size.
So it's just the smaller size, but
Yeah.
essentially the same thing. Is there an opportunity there to do segmented dog parks where smaller dogs can be in one part and bigger dogs can be another part? Is that a possibility in that, or is that just a possibility everywhere?
In our research, we didn't find that happening in too many places. I think that might be something that could come up in a particular community. Say another park is required or needed. That could be part of the survey to understand if that's a desired condition.
I've toured one in Vancouver and they have segmented parks, for different sized dogs. And I've heard from people in the community that concerns them is big dogs and small dogs.
I think the Mole Hill Dog Park has that to keep, and it's a smaller little dog run that's off to the side of it. So, and it's just, that's a matter of just building another piece of fence. So I think that's certainly something that could be entertained in the future.
Okay.
We didn't go into that level of detail because the OSTP doesn't actually go into that level of detail either.
Okay. Thanks.
Ms. Smithers, you had something to add?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to reiterate Mr. Walsh's point that that's really a design detail that would get into the actual planning and construction of a specific park. These are really intended as guidelines to dictate where and when those parks should be offered.
Great, thank you. Councillor Mara.
Thank you, Mayor Borman. Do you know of any requests, or do you have requests ever from different communities, or not communities, but neighborhoods requesting a dog park in their area, to your knowledge?
Lauren, would you like to speak to this? I don't have as full a breadth of knowledge as Lauren in terms of what kind of requests come in.
And I can second that. That would go into our Public Works Department. The scope of this review was simply in follow-up to the motion that was made by council to look at dog parks specifically. We did not dive into operational aspects associated with dog parks. It was mostly focused on size and location. So anything outside of that, administration could happily look into, but that was not the scope of this particular review. So we don't have that information available at this moment, but we could get it if you desired it.
That's fine. Thank you. I just have one more question, if I may.
Sure.
Whoops, sorry. I was just wondering, when you did your comparisons with Calgary and Vancouver. Did you check our other municipalities that are closer to us, like Banff and Cochrane, and see what their policies and ideas are?
Our research was basically limited by the amount of information we could find online and through published documents. A lot of municipalities like Cochrane, for instance, there's nothing noted. There might be a single line in a particular plan, but that's the extent. So in terms of precedent, there's not a lot for towns of our size that we could find.
Okay, thank you.
Judging by the response we had from Banff residents to Quarry Lake parking, I think that's Banff's main dog park is Quarry Lake. Could be wrong. CAO, did you want to?
Thank you. I just wanted Mayor Borman to correct my statement to you because I've pulled up the report from 2017 that Mr. Walsh has referenced, and all three parks met the appropriate criteria, but the Hubman and Palliser parks were prioritized because that's all the budget would permit at the time. And they were closer to adjacent wildlife corridors and further from existing dog parks.
Right.
So that's why they were prioritized over the Spring Creek.
Right, thank you. Yeah, I thought there was some rationale like that. Other questions for Mr. Welsh from members of council? Well, Councillor Comfort.
Yeah, so just to make sure I understand this, with those restrictions of, what was it, 120 meters distant, that we couldn't actually put a dog park in anywhere in Canmore with that descriptor.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. And so it would take a really humongous development to make that kind of restriction.
Can you repeat that question again?
It would take a big development to reach that kind of restriction, right? We'd have to.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, okay.
We would have to plan it as part of a master planned community to make it work.
Gotcha.
Larger neighborhood. Yes.
Right. So it's kind of a catch-22 thing. I
Yeah.
think.
The fear in 2017 is that if we waited for that, we could not actually keep up with the need that the town has on a whole.
Okay. Thank you. So it's common sense, right? You can't say, yeah, you should build a dog park 120 meters from the closest building or development or whatever, when we can't actually do that. So it just means no more dog parks, right?
Yes, that would be what that would mean. Yes.
Okay, just so I understand. Thank you.
Just an observation, I guess, Mr. Welsh, remembering some of the loud concerns that were expressed up in the Hubman region, once that dog park opened to the public use, we may have some pushback on the statement that fears and concerns expressed around the most recently developed dog parks have not materialized. I recall some very aggressive conversations with Hubman residents at that time, at least with one of them. Regardless, that's water under the bridge, I suppose. Now, just not to belabor the point, but with this direction, I'm thinking about the proposal in 2017 for the small dog park close to Spring Creek Mountain Village. Arguably, because that was proposed at that time, it could still be proposed even without these changes to the OSTP. No. So with these changes to the OSTP, then that dog park would be permitted. Okay, thank you. Are there questions from other members of council this time for admin? Seeing none, thanks very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Your last gasp here as town Canmore employee, huh?
Sadly, yes.
But we'll see ya. We'll see ya.
I'll still be in town.
Yeah. It's all good, good news. It's all good. We'll certainly see him or hear of him. Okay, then at this time, I'll put forward the motion. The council amend the off-leash dog park section found on page 33 of the town's open space and trails plan as follows. A, reduce the minimum distance from a residential or commercial property from 120 meters to 20 meters. And B, delete the guidelines stating minimum of 0.5 hectares area and replace it with sizes for classifications of off-leash dog parks are as follows. Dog runs up to 0.4 hectares in size, neighborhood parks 0.4 to 1 hectare in size, and destination parks over 1.0 hectares in size. If anybody is interested in splitting those two motions, well, that motion into two, I'm happy to do that, but I think we can consider this as one motion. So to the motion then, look for discussion from council, Councillor Hillstead.
I'm happy to support this motion. It makes good sense to me. Just again, with the fact that we have those three other dog parks that fall closer to this criteria. And I know they're well used, especially the one up in Glacier. So I'm happy to support this.
I'll certainly support the motion, recognizing that we may get some pushback from the community in some areas, but also recognizing that Canmore seems to have a lot of dogs, and people have to have places to run their dogs in a protected way so that people aren't running their dogs off leash in the corridors and the other environmentally sensitive lands. That's certainly a very critical part of living in Canmore, is that we respect the intent of those protected lands. And if we don't provide dog parks for people to use, then it makes it difficult for dog owners. So I'll support this motion, certainly. Also, again, recognizing that we may hear some pushback from some community sectors. Further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor and opposed, motion's carried unanimously. Thanks very much, Mr. Welsh. We'll look forward to seeing you back in front of council representing another organization. And we'll move on to item H7, Truth and Reconciliation Day event funding. Dr. Caudle.
Need the glasses, people. There we go. No, it was all me. Thanks, Sarah. Mayor Barrowman and members of council, I'm here to talk to you about Truth and Reconciliation Day event funding. So just a quick reminder of the history of residential schools in Canada. They operated it throughout Canada from 1870s through 1996 with two primary goals: to remove and isolate children from the influence of their families, traditions, and culture, and to assimilate them into the dominant, or what was considered mainstream, white culture. The stated policy goals of Indian residential schools in Canada was to remove the Indian from the child. In 1920, the Indian Act was amended to make attendance compulsory, so required for all Indigenous children. As we know, some were forcibly taken from their homes, and at least 5,296 never returned home. Children who attended were between the ages of 2 and 16. It's estimated that over 150,000 Indian, Inuit, and Métis children attended these schools. The Canadian government operated them and was financially responsible with partnerships for multiple different churches: Anglican, Catholic, Methodist, and Presbyterian. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada, also known as TRC, was created through a legal settlement around residential schools between residential school survivors and the Assembly of First Nation and Inuit representatives and the parties responsible for the creation and operation of the schools, which again was the federal government and church bodies. The mandate of Truth and Reconciliation was to inform all Canadians about what happened in residential schools, documenting the truth of survivors, families, and anyone who was personally affected. The commission spent 6 years traveling to all parts of Canada, heard from more than 6,500 witnesses during that time. Their work concluded in 2015, and they transferred their records to the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation as a permanent resource for all Canadians. And if you've never been to the website for that organization, I highly recommend it. It's a great resource. One of the things that came out of the reports of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was a call to action, and there are 94 calls that were published. There's a 6-volume final comprehensive report on policies and operations of the schools and their lasting impact. It included 10 principles for reconciliation, the 94 calls to action, which speak to all sectors of Canadian society, including municipal governments. All Canadians are encouraged to read that final report, to learn about this history, to acknowledge the impact and the impact it had on creating an unlevel playing field, and to take responsibility for creating a better future. At the town of Canmore since 2017, there's been an internal working group, and the names of the folks who are part of that group, including Mr. Welsh, are there on the screen. And we have been trying to address the 94 calls to action. We've identified 18 that apply to municipal governments and our community network. And we're also working to develop strong, meaningful relationships with our Stoney Nakoda neighbors. And Ms. Smithers and I will be bringing a report on that to council in September, and in October, a report that update the actions of the internal working group will be coming to council before the end of your term. We have several focus areas for those 18 actions. The 94 calls to action are separated into a variety of different focus areas, and the 18 that we're looking to address fall under these particular categories, which I am not going to read to you. The ongoing work is to incorporate truth and reconciliation into our town guiding documents, to create a framework for land acknowledgements as a part of our regular practice, we have a motion from council to create an MOU with the Stoney Nakoda administration and all 3 bands. And that's what Ms. Smithers and I will be bringing in September, an update on that, to provide training and education for staff, and to make sure we are using proper protocol in our interactions with Indigenous elders and knowledge keepers. And as you know, there's also now a new national holiday around truth and reconciliation in Canada. So call to action 80 from the 94 calls to action was for the federal government to establish a statutory holiday to help Canadians remember the truth of residential schools. And that's been called the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. The intent is to honor survivors and ensure that public commemoration of the history and legacy of residential schools remains a vital component of the reconciliation process. On July 7th, council updated our general holidays policy and included this as a holiday, a designated general holiday in our town of Canmore policy. And the internal working group would like to make sure that we are, as an organization, doing a commemorative event on the day for the community. Just as a reminder, the Arts and Events Department, which is normally 4 staff, right now is down to 2. As part of the pandemic response, 2 of those staff have been repurposed in other departments. So Arts and Events does not have the capability to individually create an event. So the volunteers on the internal truth and reconciliation group have all volunteered to help support that event for that day. And even though Mr. Welsh won't work for us, we will rope him in as much as possible. So I'm here today with what I think is a fairly simple budget request. We're requesting $18,000 from the general operating reserve to be transferred into the arts and events operating budget for the 2021 year. 7,000 is for the commemorative event and 11,000 is for signage replacement. So these wooden signs that are right outside out front of the Civic Center are due for replacement. As part of National Indigenous Peoples Day, Ms. Bartolome had looked at having one side of the sign converted into Stony language and had worked with Elder Buddy Wesley on getting those terms created properly. But in doing that work, she found that the signs that we have out there are beginning to rot and need replacement. So we thought this would be a great opportunity to get that budget and to incorporate the unveiling of new signs as part of this commemorative event. Any funding for future events will come forward as part of the regular budget process. It's just that because this is a new holiday, we didn't have anything in the budget for this year. So I'm here today to ask for that funding. And that's it.
Thank you very much. Simple and straightforward.
Sure
I have
is.
to say, it's great to see the suggestion to replace those signs. Yeah,
Counselor Comfort is waving. Yeah.
yeah, and I'm busy talking right now. But anxious, okay. Counselor Comfort,
I'm not anxious. I can wait. You go ahead.
oh, you go ahead. After you.
No, after you. So my question is, or a suggestion, if you will, on those signs. I suspect you're wanting to get them done in time for September 30th. But what I was wondering is, what about making that a public art project, cultural art project, and making them out of steel or metal or something else, or taking a proposal from an artist? Because they're just going to succumb again, if we do them in wood, to the vagaries of the environment and our environment here, our harsh environment. So I wondered if any consideration had been given to that.
Yeah, I don't know for certain that the signs will be in wood. So the posts themselves are still fine and have a lot of life in them. It's just the boards that actually have the words on them. So Ms. Bartolome will work with the sign maker to try to get something that is a bit more durable. But the posts themselves are still in good working order. So I'm not sure that we need a bigger project than this just yet.
Or maybe, I don't know. It just seems like we don't want to do the same thing over again, right?
Yeah, I totally, your point is taken that the wood may not be the best material. So Ms. Bartolome will work with the sign maker to get something durable that has a longer life.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Yeah, I can see a similar material that we've been using in our wayfinding signage for many years now, which are mounted on wooden poles as well, so it could work well. Just an observation, Councillor Comfort, I think to follow the direction you're suggesting would require an amendment to the motion, and I don't know if that's what you want to do at this time.
I wasn't prepared to do it at this time, but I would certainly consider, I don't know, a bigger proposal or leaving it till next year. I don't know. I don't know. I hadn't really thought that far ahead, I have to confess.
No, you've got about 4 minutes to think about it, I guess.
Okay.
Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Mayor Barman. Thank you for your presentation. Ms. Cottle, is there any potential to add a sign for the newly named Bald Eagle Peak in that collection?
Bald Eagle Peak is not within the boundary of the town of Canmore. This is purely replacement for the posts that currently exist. If we want to put up a sign that points to an additional mountain, it would be additional budget, and we have not sourced that because we only have the posts that we have. So this is really just a replacement for infrastructure that we know is failing. If council does not want to replace those signs, it would be, we wouldn't move forward with this. It would just be the 7,000 for the commemorative event, and we could look at a bigger project, but that would be a bigger capital budget part of the regular budget process.
Okay, but we can actually see it from here, so.
Yeah, no,
Maybe it's a future
I don't know
consideration.
how it was decided, what
Yeah.
mountains were, that's all before I've worked at the town for 15 years and those signs have always been here when I've come to work. So I don't know how it was decided what posts were, but again, we're not changing the posts. It's just the sign. So anything
Right.
addition to sign replacement is more budget and I don't know what those costs would be.
Okay, I just thought.
Yeah, no, I appreciate where it's coming from, but.
Truth and reconciliation, it's
Yeah, and to
getting
your
closer to
point,
it.
I mean, most of the mountains we identify are technically not within the town of Canmore boundary. So I don't know how it was chosen, which ones they point to. It's maybe somebody who's been here longer knows.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Are there other questions for Dr. Cottle? Seeing none. I'm looking at Councilor Comfort. You're okay with where we're at? Okay. In which case, well, thanks for bringing the report forward, and I will move the council approve a transfer of $18,000 from the general operating reserve to the arts and events budget for a Truth and Reconciliation Day commemorative event and signage. I'll speak in support of this motion. Clearly, we have to have a budget for the Truth and Reconciliation Day, since we've approved that recently as a general holiday for the town of Canmore. And I've long thought those signs needed replacing. So I'm happy to support that part of the motion as well. You know, I think to the point of the conversation, there's an opportunity in the future to have other sorts of commemorative signs that recognize other features. But from my perspective, for the ease of completing the project by September the 30th, I would guess it would be best to move forward as recommended by admin. Other discussion on the motion? Councilor McCallum?
Thank you, Mayor Barman. So I am pleased to support this proposal. I think that these are very clear but tentative first steps in our step as a council and a town in terms of reconciliation. And a prominent place in front of our civic center, the place of the people, is a great place to start. So I'm happy to see this brought forward. I'm happy to see the work and the content of that the subcommittee is doing through the town. And I know that the public is going to be wondering how we're going to move forward in this space. And I feel like we're doing a tentative but confident step. So I'm happy to support this.
Councilor Sanford.
Thank you, Mayor Barman. I too am happy to support this. I think it's a good way to acknowledge that we are looking at September 30th as a significant day on our calendar. And since it is time to replace those signs, it seems to be the right time to upgrade them with the Indigenous knowledge that we have. So I'm also happy that there's a volunteer committee that's graciously donating their time to this project, because I know that the group who are part of that subcommittee have been very dedicated to looking at ways to move this forward. So I would be happy to support it.
Further discussion on the motion? Councilor Comfort?
Yeah, I agree. I would hope that down the road, this is such a public, high-profile spot, and it certainly has been a great place for festivals and art displays to highlight their offerings. So it may just be, I know it's not one of the spots we have in mind for more public art, but it might be worth considering in discussion by the new cultural committee, because, and it might not be the signs that are there now or anything like them, but it's certainly a point of pride, a place of pride, a place of flagpoles too, right? So I'd love to see something developed there, but it's too soon. You know, September 30th is 2021 is too soon. So I will support this motion.
Counselor, are there other comments, other discussion from members of council? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried unanimously. And when the next council gets to talking about additional signage, as I won't be here, I'll just put it on the table now. Suggested years ago that we put a welcome to Canmore sign at the entranceway that's written in Stony Nakota. Just tuck that away for future reference. Simple thing to do. Anyways, we're moving on. Item J1, which is a verbal report on the boil water advisory incident. Ms. Smithers, and I see EPCOR's here with Mr. Letourneau and sorry, I've forgotten your name. Right you are. Ms. Smithers.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Borman and members of council. I am here this afternoon to report to you on the boil water advisory incident that we just experienced recently as a community. I'm going to present an overview and then I will hand it over or invite members of the team to help answer questions. So I'll ask that you hold questions till the end of the presentation. And then we have Dennis Letourneau and Kevin Visser from EPCOR, as well as Chantel Blais from engineering. And then Adam Robertson is in the Zoomosphere to answer any questions that members of council may have. So first off, I'm just going to walk you through a chronology of events. The incident started on Thursday, July 29th of this year. That afternoon, EPCOR was bringing new water infrastructure into service. As that infrastructure was being commissioned, they began receiving calls about brown water from residents and businesses in the community. So EPCOR informed the town and alerted the province that this was happening. I'd like to make it clear at this point that this was an unplanned event. There was no reason to anticipate that the commissioning of the infrastructure would trigger the sediment and turbidity in the system. So this was, I think it's important that people keep in mind that this was an unplanned event that we had to respond to. And also, there's a need for following provincial protocols in matters like this. So when the province is notified, as they should be notified, Alberta Environment and Protection and Alberta Health Services jointly kind of take over on the decision-making and the guidance related to a boil water advisory. They use information and data provided to them by EPCOR and by CEMA Plus, who do the town's water modeling, but it is the province that makes the decisions on boil water advisories or orders, both putting them in place and lifting them. So I just want to be clear about that at the outset. So the evening of Thursday, July 29th, the province did issue the boil water advisory for Canmore and Deadman's Flats and parts of Harvey Heights. And at that point, both EPCOR and the town began communicating that advisory out to the community. On the morning of Friday, July 30th, the town activated our emergency coordination center. And we also issued an Alberta emergency alert for the Canmore area. At the same time, EPCOR worked with CEMA Plus to develop and then begin executing the plan for flushing the water lines. And this again had to be approved by the province before we could begin executing that plan. In the afternoon and evening, the advisory was lifted for Harvey Heights and Deadman's Flats and the Canmore Nordic Center. And that was because it was determined that there is no impact to those areas. And also in the afternoon and evening of the 30th, the setup of potable water stations began so that members of the community could have access to potable water. On Saturday, July 31st in the morning, the town did have 5 potable water locations offered to the community. Also in the morning of July 31st, we had to take Pump House 1 offline for a period of time. And the reason was there was a concern that having Pump House 1 continuing to operate would push sediment into areas of the system that had clean water. So in order to prevent that, the pump house was temporarily shut down. Unfortunately, at the same time, the Benchlands Reservoir was only about half full, which is normal in the day-to-day operations of the water system. But just that combination of the Pump House 1 being taken offline and the low water level in the Benchlands Reservoir
really created a situation where there was already low pressure in the water system for that part of the community, combined with some sensitivity of the infrastructure in that part of the community to low water pressure to begin with. That did result in some households and businesses being without water for brief periods of time. And that was actually, I believe, on the Friday late afternoon, as well as Saturday late afternoon. There were 5 to 7 hour spans of time where a segment of the community didn't have water. Really, that was just kind of a perfect storm. Again, an unprecedented situation for the community and for EPCOR to be in. And that was the reasoning behind it. And the experts will answer questions on that afterwards, because that's about as deep as I go into that one. I wanted to talk for a bit about the flushing of the water system that we had to take on. So the colored areas on this map indicate the parts of town where EPCOR was required to flush the system. It is a big area, but to exclude a pressure zone from the necessity for flushing, EPCOR had to prove to the province through our water modeling that turbidity had not affected those zones and could not affect those zones. If they could not prove that, the areas had to be flushed. And that is why you'll see on this map, for example, Silvertip and parts of Rendellview and Homesteads didn't have to be flushed, because we could prove that the turbidity and the sediment didn't reach those pressure zones. The rest of it had to be flushed. I also wanted to take a moment to address the numbering attached to these zones. This numbering more or less corresponds with the operational pressure zones in the water system. The reason was, at the time, the emphasis really was on restoring the water system for the community. So in working with SEMA Plus and for EPCOR to be able to develop the flushing plan, it was really focused on that operational lens of the pressure zones. Then this map ended up in part being a communication tool, which I think led to some confusion in the community, because there is some thought that the order of flushing should follow the numbering convention on this map. And it was never intended to do that. I think just in the rush to get at it and restore the water system, it was some confusion that resulted. In terms of the phasing order and how it actually was implemented, just by the nature of the water system, the requirement really was to start at those higher elevation parts of the community and then work down to the lower elevation parts of the community. So they had to also go pressure zone by pressure zone. So we started with the pressure zones kind of up on the sides of the valley, and then moved towards the valley floor and followed that sequence, just to make sure that the clean water was able to push the dirty water out and not reintroduce it back into the system. I wanted to speak briefly on communications. The town, once the boil water advisory was ordered or put out there, the town did create a web page on our canmore.ca website. And that web page was visited over 71,000 times. We also had an interactive map with areas affected for people to go to the website at any time and see if their area was still within that boil water advisory order. And that map was visited over 26,000 times. We issued the emergency alert. We had an emergency newsletter that we used to push updates out to the community. My understanding is at the beginning of the boil water advisory, we had about 700 subscribers to that emergency newsletter. We now have over 2,000. So we more than doubled subscription to that newsletter. We placed electronic signs at town entrances to advise visitors about the boil water advisory. We issued news releases and conducted media interviews. And we use social media, both the town and EPCOR use their social media channels to push out information and updates related to the boil water advisory. And I know that the town's social media reached over 150,000 users or visits. We also had direct communication to town businesses, to the MD of Bighorn, to the Seniors Lodge and grocery stores, and regular ongoing communication, obviously, between EPCOR and the town. And there was a very high level of collaboration between EPCOR and the town in addressing this incident. Just wanted to share some quick numbers. There were parts of the community that had up to 12 days under the boil water advisory, at the peak of flushing the water system, we had 6 crews from EPCOR working 24/7. And I want to say too that EPCOR has staffed those crews with employees and equipment from Edmonton. They had 14 people come down from Edmonton and bring equipment with them to assist with the flushing of the system. They had staff from Kananaskis, Strathmore, and Calgary coming to town as well. And I wanted to mention that Kevin had called out that the Edmonton crews flagged their appreciation for Canmore residents who would stop in the street to thank them for the work they were doing. They had never seen that before, and they were overwhelmed by the positive response they had in the community. We had a 24-hour turnaround on the water test results from AHS. And again, the lab technicians with AHS in Calgary stayed late in their labs to be able to receive the water samples from Canmore and begin processing them immediately so they could give as quick a turnaround as possible on reporting back on the test results to lift the water advisory. And then lastly, at the end of the day, it was about 70 kilometers of public and private water mains that were flushed. So that's about 60% of the whole water system for the town. And then just briefly on next steps, obviously there'll be an incident investigation, and with that will come a determination of costs. Because the boil water advisory was like finally lifted for the last part of the community only about a week ago, that piece of this journey is just beginning. EPCOR is putting together a team to conduct that incident investigation. There's going to be a debrief and lessons learned, both with EPCOR as part of this investigation and then with the town through the ECC. As the ECC was being rolled out, we did capture some lessons learned as we went there. And then there'll also be a report back to council and the community once the incident investigation has wrapped up. So, and I can't give timing on when that will be yet, obviously, because it is just kicking off. So I did want to say also, I just wanted to acknowledge that this was a very challenging situation for members of our community, for residents and businesses. It was also very challenging for the town and EPCOR staff who were working to resolve this, who are also members of the community. So we do appreciate, particularly after the 1.5 years that people have been through, this was rough. And I just want to express my appreciation for the town and EPCOR staff and working so hard together to pull this off and get the system back to safe water as quickly as possible. Thank you, and we'll take questions.
Thanks very much. I don't have questions personally. I don't know if other members of council do. I don't know if Mr. Letourneau wanted to speak as well, or just here to answer questions. By all means, if you wanted to. And if you don't, that's fine.
Yeah, I just wanted to say also that the member of Alberta Environment, Mr. Chad Moore, was with us the entire time. The one statistic, I guess, that's not up there is the amount of hours that Chad and I got for sleep for 12 days, probably about 30 hours. And he was sterling in his commitment to this community and trying to get the boil water advisories lifted. I recall one grueling evening session that he did full of math and modeling with SEMA Plus to ensure that the reservoirs at Pump House 4 were not contaminated, and thus allowed us to continue on the flushing plan. That had that not been done, it would have delayed the process at least another day or more. So I just wanted to acknowledge AEP in their efforts. He didn't hand that over after 5 days to someone on the weekends or the evenings. He was there 24/7 for the entire time from beginning to end. So just wanted to make sure that he was mentioning this.
Thank you. I see there's some questions from members of council. I'll ask Councillor Hillstead to take the mic.
Yeah, I was just curious with the flushing, do we have a flushing program that we normally go through each year, or how, because I know with Banff, they have, I think, a spring flushing program where they go and they exercise the fire hydrants and they do flushing. But I've just never noticed it until this event of us actually flushing things. So do we do that in Canmore normally?
Is it on?
Yeah.
Yeah, the challenge with Canmore and particularly the infrastructure here is that there's difficulty in finding where to put the potable water, which is chlorinated. And the Edmonton crews that came down to assist us found that very quickly, that compared to a flushing situation in Edmonton where they can just run it right into the storm drains or the sewer collection system, and the systems up there have the capacity to accommodate the volumes required to flush. They were struggling throughout the 10 to 12 days here to find locations to put the water. For the most part, there's very little storm system in the valley bottom that accepts potable water. We have dry wells that fill up in a matter of seconds. You have the inability to put it into the sewer system, again, in the valley bottom, because you'll be backing up resident sewers in a matter of minutes too. And then it's difficult to put it into any of the water courses here. We're surrounded with sensitive, sometimes class 2 water systems with fish-bearing creeks, et cetera. So it's a challenge to have any sort of flushing program up to this date. To my knowledge, there hasn't been one for those reasons.
And then, because like I noticed, like, certain parts of town obviously got hit harder than others, and because my house didn't get any sediment, but once the flushing program started, that's when I actually got a little bit of stuff. But that was just due to that's the whole point of flushing, right? Is that it helps remove old sediment and build up. So I was just curious with if we did have a flushing program. So thank you for that.
Mm-hmm. And my home is in one of the areas that was impacted with the low to no water event. So my wife was texting me just as were my neighbors, wondering where the water was. We had no ability to predict that event because of the variability of the system and the sensitivity of some of those pieces of infrastructure.
It's interesting to understand that the complexity of the response, and I'm curious, given that challenge to find somewhere to let the water flow, what was the answer? What did your crews end up doing?
It was very specialized control of the flow to minimize those events. It was a dynamic situation where they would literally be looking at seeing how quickly the dry wells were filling up, and they'd have to ease off on the flow coming out. The flows we selected were quite low for this reason. So there weren't scouring events, which you would do in major municipal communities such as Edmonton, because there's just no way to accept that volume of water.
Mm-hmm.
So these were low flow events where we were more concerned with replacing the old water with new water and turning it over to ensure that it was safe to drink. That was the primary goal, was to return this community to safe drinking water as quickly as possible. And by using very low flow methodology, we're able to maintain regular flushing, let's say, to accommodate that. Mm-hmm. But it was a challenge. I was out there with the crews with flashlights in the middle of the night looking for places to put the water in Larch and other areas. I understood firsthand the complexities that the town has dealt with when they ran the system, and prior to EPCOR taking over, and the issues that EPCOR has also had since we've had the contract for the last 20 years.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. It never occurred to me to think of that as a challenge, but I understand it. It's pretty interesting. Mm-hmm. Councillor Seeley, you had a question?
Yeah, this one's a little tricky, but AHS and community safety is very important. And there's a lot of flushing that had to happen, and they directed you to do that. Is there a reason, and is there lessons learned? I guess the extent of the flushing is pretty significant, and they triggered that, I would assume.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite.
So AHS, Alberta Health Services, they became involved, and they wanted the lines almost completely flushed. I'm just trying to understand that, and maybe it'll come out in the final report.
Yeah, I think because we were not able to determine the source of the turbidity AHS took the route of protecting public safety first and foremost, and we certainly agreed with them in their decision to place the boil water advisory, just to be sure, as a very conservative and approach to the issue.
Thank you.
So really just a precautionary approach and taken, sounds like fairly extreme approach, but one has to be uber careful.
Yes, when public health's on the line, and my children and my wife drink the water too. So I want to make sure that the right decision is being made.
So right you are. Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Mayor Barman. I'm just wondering if there's a way to, EPCOR obviously does this all the time when there's a water uncertainty, a way to communicate the health risk of turbidity, because turbidity is kind of up in the air, and people were imagining all kinds of things that could have been that turbidity. But how can we let people know that turbidity is on a scale of 1 to 10? If it's something that is a major health risk or a minimal health risk, but of course AHS stepped in and said we have to boil that water to make sure that it's clean. How do we communicate turbidity and so that people can understand it? Because I don't think people understood that this time.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think it's a communication question. So I'll defer to Adam, perhaps, who is in charge of communications, if he's available.
Adam?
Yeah, I know, Councillor Sanford, that is a good question. And I think that can be one learning that we take as a department moving forward. We definitely saw that question, what is turbidity and what does it mean? And I think in this case, the focus of the operations and communications was really on informing residents of what's being done right now, how it impacts them, timing of when they'll hear from us next, and how we're going to get the system clean. And I think the main overarching message around turbidity and safety was that to drink your water, if you're in the red zone, you need to boil it first. So we didn't go into detail about what turbidity meant. I don't know, and I don't want to speak for Mr. Letourneau or from an operations perspective, but that wasn't I think determining what that was. The priority was getting the safety and AHS to clear all of the zones, because that was determined we had to do.
Thanks very much, Adam.
So once it goes to an AHS boil water advisory, it's now a precaution to ensure that people are protected.
That's my understanding, correct? Yep.
And then to remove the boil water advisory, you had to prove to them with the lab samples that the water was now safe after all the steps that we're taking, which took a lot of effort from EPCOR, obviously, to take all those steps.
That's right. They have to be confident that the flushing plan is going to achieve that goal. So we had to lay out in its entirety, step by step, what the flushing plan was. And again, credit goes to SEMA Plus, who put in a lot of late hours and a Herculean effort to actually get a flushing plan initially in place almost immediately within a matter of hours that we could start acting with. And then they stayed ahead of us as we activated crews and brought in more resources to ensure that there was no delay in the process. But all that had to be run by AEP and AHS for their review and approval, so that they were confident that if we executed this as outlined, that we were achieving their goals. And then the follow-up, of course, was the testing that went in immediately after we finished flushing a particular area. And again, AHS held the doors open late in the evening to ensure that those samples went into the incubator right away, and the 24-hour clock started from that moment, and thus we would have results 24 hours later, rather than starting the incubator the next morning and then having 24 hours from there. So everyone really put in a fantastic effort to try and get the community back to potable water as quickly as possible.
We thank you for all that effort.
Thank you.
Other questions from members of council? Councillor Comfort?
Yeah, I just wondered about, apparently this was something to do with the changeover to the new pipe. That was part of the issue. We don't know the full reason, but I just wondered about choosing the timing of that for on a long weekend. That maybe it might have been better to go after the long weekend or even more than that. And that'll come out, I guess, in the final report. But I don't mean to sound accusatory. I just can't believe how hard you all must have worked. And I think that in some respects, Canmore is like a, I don't know, what do they call that? There used to be a term for it in the diplomatic, a hardship post. So because of the issues with our high water table and so on and so on and so on. So, but I just did wonder about timing the changeover for a long weekend holiday.
Yeah, because my focus is really the operation and maintenance of the existing system. I think those questions will be addressed in the investigation that's ongoing right now, and perhaps there'll be some answers coming out of that when that investigation report is released.
Okay, thank you. And again, many thanks for your service at EPCOR.
Thank you.
Councillor Mara.
Thank you. I'm just, as I noticed, I think all of Canmore's back drinking water. And I'd just like to say thank you to everybody that was involved in getting us back online, I think, in a quick manner. And I'm very thankful for all the resources that we have and everybody that put the extra time in. And I just wanted to state that. So thank you.
Thank you. And again, I think the community was very supportive of the team and even people on my street. During the few hours that I did get home, there was sometimes a few notes of thanks on the porch, which we appreciated.
Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Mayor. And again, I wanted to say thank you, but I wanted to actually expand a bit and say thanks to your family, because I know that your spouse was doing a very big job of communicating everything, any piece of information out on social media. And she did a great job. And I thought you might want to bring that home to her at dinner time, because she certainly has a broad reach and she used it to our informational advantage. So.
Yeah. She's an unpaid
I know
town employee.
or EPCOR employee, who knows? She gets swag at Christmas, right?
That's right. Yeah, she didn't see much of me for those 10 days. I was home after they were asleep when I was back, before they woke up. So my communications with my wife and kids were basically text messages when I could. Yeah, pretty much.
I suspect that's not the first time that your family's gone through that long absence with you being busy on the job. And I have to say, once again, this is a very strong indication of the value of the partnership, the relationship we have with EPCOR, and it's it's an integral part of the decision of the council, I think, to renew the contract. We've had such amazing and dependable partnership from EPCOR ever since you started with the work, managing our facilities for the town. And I think back to the response during the flood, particularly, and other times, particularly in the spring when our groundwater has been so high, and your crews have been out there night and day managing those issues. But we know we can count on a really strong and immediate response from EPCOR, and I understand that some people in the community were frustrated by the inconvenience of being without tap water for some time. But honestly, I think kudos to EPCOR and your crews, and you can pass that along to all of the EPCOR folks that came down from Edmonton. The town of Canmore really appreciates that the effort that went into addressing this unplanned situation. So thank you very much for the work you've been doing and for joining us today to give a little background and try to answer some of the questions that we have.
Thank you. And it's good to see all of you in person again. I wish it was under different circumstances.
Yeah, it's nice to be back in person.
Yeah. Thank you.
And Ms. Smithers, of course, to town administration, the same thought. I know your crew was working hard and communications. The CAO wasn't around, but that's beside the point. The acting CAO managed very nicely, just saying. But altogether, it was another super bit of teamwork between the town and EPCOR.
Thank you. I did want to say, I think EPCOR was phenomenal in this, as was SEMA Plus and AHS and AP, but I also think it's worth calling out the efforts of town staff who put in a ridiculous amount of hours to address this and support EPCOR so that they could focus on restoring the water supply while the town looked after communications and the community members through the potable water and signage through, we had parks and streets and roads and communications and across the whole corporation, all hands on deck. So it was just a great effort by everyone.
Right, you are. Thanks for being here, gentlemen. I believe that will take us through to in camera. Everybody's good to keep moving at this point, 4 o'clock. So just if anybody's watching at home, we'll be moving in camera at this time to discuss a number of issues under the disclosure of privileged information in accordance with sections 27(1)A and 27(2) of the Freedom of Information Protection and Privacy Act and other related sections of the Act. Council won't be making any decisions when we come out of in camera. So we won't be returning to the public broadcast of the meeting after the in-camera session. So thank you all for being